Welcome back to the Better Dads Club podcast. I'm Tom Dorman, and this week's guest is Shirley Pastiroff. She's a counselor, mindful parenting coach, author of The Mindful Parent, and mother of 5. In this conversation, we explore what mindful parenting actually looks like in the real world. It's not the perfect Instagram version, not some cool, calm, collected Zen state where everybody's sitting around humming and meditating all day. Because the reality is, parenting is messy. Kids have meltdowns. Emotions run high. We're low on sleep. We've got other deadlines and things elsewhere. And often, if we're honest, we don't handle those situations as well as we'd like. One of the key themes in this conversation is that mindful parenting isn't about your children at all. It's about understanding yourself. It's about recognizing what your triggers are, understanding what's happening inside of you when things get difficult, and learning how to regulate yourself so that you can become a steady presence for your child. Because when our kids are overwhelmed by big emotions and we become overwhelmed as well, that's lose-lose. But when we stay grounded, we give our children the opportunity to learn emotional regulation for themselves, a skill that will serve them for the rest of their lives. We also unpack the myth that mindful parenting families are somehow perfect. In reality, they're just families where the adults are doing the work of understanding themselves and taking responsibility for how they show up. There's some fantastic practical advice and tools in this episode, and Shirley shares both research and her own experience in raising 5 children. I got a lot out of this conversation, and I hope you do too. And if you are enjoying the Better Dads Club podcast, click the link in the show notes so that we can keep connected in the community. You can find out more about what we're doing in time. Here's my chat with Shirley. Shirley, welcome along. Thank you very much for joining me this evening on the Better Dads Club podcast. I appreciate you being here with me. You are also the first female speaker that we've had, so this is cool. And you're a mindful parent counselor, and you're obviously working with couples and how to raise kids. You've got courses, you've got books, you've got kids yourself and trying to manage your whole family and everything. So yeah, really excited to glean some wisdom from you, especially on the professional side of things as well. But I guess first up, I'd just like to invite you to talk a little bit about yourself, where you've come from, and what got you into the work that you do.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Originally from the UK, which you may or may not still be able to hear in my voice. Hopefully you can. And my first career was in the media, so I worked in documentary making, which, even though it doesn't feel similar to counselling, had a very similar driver in it, in that I'm slightly fascinated by people's stories at depth, sitting with people over long periods of time and interviewing them about their life stories. So I did that in a different form before I had children, and then had 2 kids in the UK, came over to the New Zealand for sort of initially a bit of a fun adventure, and then, as so many people say, never quite managed to leave. It's a hard country to leave, especially with little kids. I am a huge fan of England, and bringing up little ones over here just has massive advantages in terms of space and outdoors and things like that. After a couple of years here, we had another child, and then we had identical twins after that, which is a bit of a surprise. So we ended up with 5 kids, all in, I think they were 6.5 years apart, top to bottom. And so I stayed home with the kids for a few years. I think, to be honest, I couldn't even get my head out of nappy world to even think about getting back to work for a while. And when I resurfaced, I just knew I'm an introvert by nature. I just knew I couldn't do a kind of busy, crazy, noisy media world, which I loved. But after working in the media, I'd come home and sort of get my solitude time. But I knew that coming home to 5 kids was not going to give me the space that I needed. So I started thinking about a career where I could do the more quiet work outside the house so that I had energy for my tribe at home. And I'd always wondered about psychology, about counselling. And so I went back to university and retrained at a postgraduate in counselling theory. And I've been running a business in individual counselling, couple counselling. And I also do quite a lot of stress management training, which is called a multitude of names, and they all mean the same thing, which I'm sure people would fight me on that. But they're mindfulness, stress management, well-being, the world is kind of longing for all this stuff at the moment. So I work in corporates and in education sector in schools and with community groups and parenting groups to bring the kind of what we know now about the brain and about stress management, about deeper relationships and connections to, I guess, groups rather than just working one-to-one. It breaks up the intensity for me of working one-on-one as well. I really enjoyed the working in a group. It's a lot more fun and a bit more, there's a lot more interaction, which I really enjoy.
Does that allow for more open conversation, a bit more safety for people to actually get to the bottom of what they're dealing with?
A little bit of yes and no to that. So obviously people go much deeper when they're on their own, when they're completely private. But a lot of people don't come to therapy because they don't think that is something they need. And what's really lovely about group work is a lot of people come when they're just either curious or a little bit stressed or want to do some emotion regulation. And so we're not doing the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. So even though they can't go as deep unless they're really not bothered about personal privacy, as a whole, many more people are touched by the idea of knowing themselves better and being vulnerable in a group. So I think it does a different type of depth. It does personal depth slightly less, but relational depth a lot more.
Did you always know that you wanted to get into the parenting side of things?
Yeah, no, it was completely wasn't. I was running mindfulness groups for small groups in the community for just general people. And because they were small groups, lots of conversation around who I was, who they were. And after about 2 years of doing this, I'd had so many comments from people going, you need to turn this into parenting specific material because of your family and your personal experiences applying the material as a parent. And also, I think I brought more stories from the parenting space because it's the space I was finding the hardest. And then eventually that turned into a parenting course, which turned into a parenting book. So in some ways, I've almost worked quite hard to get myself out of the niche parenting space because I don't want to work in it 100% of the time, but probably 60% of my work is still in that space.
How did your studies influence the way that you were parenting?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that's actually where I got quite committed or passionate or got the bit between my teeth about parenting because it really didn't. The theory is all very well and not that impossible to apply to oneself on a sunny day. But the moment that you've got anybody in your environment who you don't really have that much control over, and being a parent yourself, you'll know that's kind of not the gig. We have agency and connection and all of that, but I wouldn't want my parents to have had control over me. That's not the goal. But what I found was the kind of unpredictability of little ones splurged out way beyond any of the psychology I was learning. And it really frustrated me because I'm not a huge academic, although I love study. But for me, if it doesn't work on a wet Tuesday morning with a couple of yelling kids, then it doesn't work. It has to work at that level. And so I started working really much more deeply with material much beyond my studies. So a lot of neuropsychology, a lot of neurobiology, a lot of mindfulness, a lot of deeply kind of emotional and body-based work as well. What I discovered was where I thought the changes needed to happen, which was in each one of my 5 children. I discovered they were in me and us, my partner at the time, that when we were in a state of connection with each other and or connection with ourselves. Over time, the kids their tantrums slowed down, their resilience grew, and it was just so obvious that we really were the holders of the atmosphere. We were the water they were swimming in. And even though that was tough, I remember feeling excited and going, oh, if it is me that can help change this, move the tanker so that it's facing the other direction, that big steering wheel of a, massive tanker. If you're trying to change direction, it's a lot of energy. But if I'm trying to change somebody else, even though it feels juicy and kind of a little bit like, yeah, the problem's over there, actually we don't have much agency in that space. So it can make us feel very kind of angry or a bit hopeless. And so I think for me to realize my regulation and my self-knowledge was actually where I was heading was a bit of a relief in the end. And I saw it wasn't fast changes though. It's relationships are evolutions. You don't suddenly make a child feel safe with you if you've been shouting at them for the last 6 months, or a child feel courage if you've been getting annoyed when they fail for the last 2 years or 2 weeks. It takes time for a child to trust that they're not going to get that same impatient, kind of knee jerk, wanting them to be convenient reaction. So it's a real commitment over the long haul, but it's a win-win because it doesn't just support the kids. I like myself better. I'm not like, oh, I did it all for the kids. So the kind of rising tide lifted all the boats over time.
Yeah, well, it's that old saying, right, of when you're raising your kids, you actually have that opportunity to heal yourself, and the behaviors and things that you're trying to change in the other people. I mean, this is general psychology anyway, right? Like the things that you're trying to change in the other people are generally the aspects of yourself that you're not happy with. And so you wrote the book, The Mindful Parent. So conscious parenting, mindful parenting, these terms, they're thrown out there, and I know a lot of dads that are a little bit like, oh, that's just sort of woo-woo, blah, blah, blah. So for the dads who may be unfamiliar with mindfulness, like what does mindful parenting actually look like in everyday life?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I guess the simple answer is that it means you know yourself well. It means that you feel that you're confident in a space to be around difficulty, to be around inconvenience, to be around playfulness, to be around deadlines, to be around all sorts of things that you may or may not find easy, but that you're not going to outsource your difficulty to somebody else who is 3 or 13 or any age in between, that you're going to just take responsibility for going, in these particular traffic situations, I get riled up, or in these particular situations where a child is refusing, I feel disrespected, whatever it might be. And so that conscious just simply means I'm conscious of myself. And mindfulness just simply means I'm mindful of myself, which means, do I have early warning signs? Can I tell when my temperature's going up slightly? Can I tell when my jaws got a bit tight? Can I tell when my fists have got a little bit, ooh? Can I tell when I'm experiencing emotion, which one it is? Am I sad, scared, angry? Those are the three main ones. You don't need 25,000 emotions to know. And if I'm sad, what might be making me sad? Am I sad that my child doesn't like me today? Am I scared that my child's going to fail? Am I angry that my child's not listening? Like just a really simple awareness and an ability to bring down your nervous system. However you do that, I have loads of tools in the book. Breathing is a very simple one. You can breathe for 10 seconds as long as, again, it's a safe situation. You don't have to grab a child from hurting themselves or another. Even breathing for 10 seconds is enough to go, this is about me and not about them first and foremost. So that consciousness is lots of different, very quick tools. Sometimes it's doing a quick dance. Sometimes it's putting on some loud music. Sometimes it's having a little private boxing, in the background. Sometimes it's a much more sensitive thing. Sometimes it's deciding that today is not a day for lots of activity, lots of football in the park. Maybe today's a day for a cuddle under the blanket with your kid in an action movie or a quiet book, or that feeling of your child's best life is if you're enjoying your life. They're sponges. One of the things that I think, by and large, there are loads of exceptions to this, that dads do better than mums, is dads kind of know that. There's this, I don't want to exactly call it selfish, but there's this direction that men often have, which is, I'm going this way, come along with me. And it's actually really good for kids. It's the old kind of mentoring, apprenticing into adult life model. I'm going fishing. Again, these are very stereotypical gendered things, but say I'm going to go and play chess. I'm going to go and read this book on the sofa. It doesn't have to be sport and fishing. It can be any kind of activity. I'm going to bake. Come along with me. What we women tend to do less well is we kind of spend a little bit too much time checking the kids all right, or they can't do that because it'll be cold and wet, or they can't do that because they'll need this and that and the other, or I need to focus on their needs. And actually, one of the things that I think really balances me, certainly when I do that as a mum, is when I'm around my partner or somebody else who would be using that male energy. I'm going to say male energy because some women have a lot of it too. Which is that children are looking around going, subconsciously, not consciously, does adult life look fun? Does it look interesting? Does it look inspiring? Do I want to become an adult? And so one of the things I love about men when they're like, I'm just doing this thing, you come along with me, is that children are getting a sense of it. Yeah, my dad's into this, I'm not into that, but him being into things is okay, so I'm allowed to be into things. And so I think that would probably be my summary of conscious parenting, is it's really about you knowing yourself, enjoy the fact that when you're happy and enjoying yourself, your child will thrive. You don't have to stop doing the things you love. Bring them along if you can, or talk to them about it when you come home, show them pictures. And the other side is when you're not doing well, know about it. Know about your stresses so that less of them land automatically in the lap of your child, that there's a pause in between them happening in your body, even if your child was the trigger, a pause between that happening and it all landing in their lap. So maybe just some of it does, or even none of them, and you can actually move into that more toned down, viscerally regulated state. That's all it is. It's just written about in many, many different forms, just because all of us have different versions of things that we enjoy to use to self-regulate.
Myself, I've definitely found that as my son's been my biggest mirror, biggest reflection. So whenever I'm noticing if he's getting uppity, when my dad would snap and there would be yelling, there would be potentially some kind of violence, whether that was throwing or slamming or, a smack over the head, but recognizing that, this is a 3.5-year-old boy who's got a whole lot of hormones, who's like brand new to the world, brand new in his meat suit, and there's no idea what's going on. He's trying to figure out how his limbs work and what everything does. And for a parent to react in a way that is almost childlike themselves, it's the don't do that, or the yelling, or potentially negative or stressful ways of trying to tame a child's behavior. What are some of the tools that people could easily implement if they are finding themselves reacting in that way?
Yeah, so I generally work with tools that have to go in two directions. It's almost like children often don't really hear they're not really listening, but they're feeling and sensing us all the time. So they hear the tone way more strongly in their nervous system than they hear the words. So if you said, hey, buddy, stop, don't do that, it wouldn't be too bad. But it's when we say it, generally, we've got quite a heightened vocal cords nervous system, and that immediately engages with the kid's nervous system and creates cortisol in their system. But there's a two-way process here, and we can talk about both. The first is we have to be able to regulate ourselves. And like you said, because our children are mirrors, we don't need to be trained to be parents when there's no trigger. Most of us are great parents. Like, we naturally love these things more than anything in our lives. And on a good day with a following wind, and when they're well behaved and they sleep well, we just love them, But the moment they don't say something that is an inconvenience for us, or a trigger for us, or makes us feel embarrassed in front of others, or like we're failing as a parent, or we just don't have enough time to deal with this refusal in this moment, we get a rush of cortisol and adrenaline, or a drip. It depends how big it is. So I'll come back to that, but let's assume that you have a self-regulation tool. The tool that I use the most often with parents with children is called MLP, which stands for Mirror, Link, Pause. And there's lots of tools really similar to this. This is just one of them, and it's a really easy to remember one. If you've got young kids, My Little Pony was the toy we used to try and remember MLP. So the mirror is where we don't start with any kind of either annoyance or even with fixing and solving. So the mirror would start with recognizing, just to the best of your ability, what the child might be experiencing. So we go for the story behind the behavior first. And this is based around a lot of research now where the behaviorists used to go for the behavior with a reward and consequence model. So if you do that, I will take away this. If you do that, I will reward you with this. It's been going since about the 70s. It doesn't work. It was researched on rats. It was never researched on human beings with attachment needs. And so what we've discovered now is that even though sometimes it works, and if you do it really harshly, it can work through fear for a significant period of time, but it will break the relationship and we will get quite difficult behaviors out of it. So the mirror does the opposite. So in your situation, the mirror might be where you say, hey, mate, looks like you're having a hard day. Hey, mate, looks like you're really annoyed. I turned the iPad off. Hey, mate, you really want to cross this road on your own. So it just recognizes the thing that the child is going through. Now, this has got nothing to do with agreeing that they're going to be allowed to do it. And it's always invitational because you might have got the wrong emotion or the wrong incident that they're reacting to. So as an example, I might say to one of my girls coming home from school, just because they tend to have more of an up and down school life than my boy. Got 4 girls, 1 boy. So there's a lot of up and down emotions in the house. And I might say to them, oh man, it sounds like you've had a really hard day. You know, you had a test this morning. And one of them will come back with, it wasn't my test, it was my friend. Like she wouldn't play with me today or she wouldn't talk to me today. So we're always doing it invitationally. So it sounds like, it looks like, and when they're little, it can be all quite physical. As they get older, it's a bit more in depth. And then the link just says that makes sense. So rather than, but you have to hold my hand, crossing the road, you say that makes sense. You just want to be a bit independent. Now, we're holding their hand while we're doing this, or we're turning the iPad off while it's happening. I can see what you don't want me to turn the iPad off. Makes sense. You love the iPad. Now, it's so much more helpful on the child's nervous system. In tantrums slow down so much faster than if we say, hey, I'm turning the iPad off. You've been on it all afternoon. It's going to make your eyes go square. It's not good for your brain. And we do this effort thing where we hope the child will turn around and go, yeah, that makes sense. It's fine for you to take the iPad away. I don't want square eyes. But of course, they never do. They feel the sense of, rather than us being genuinely comfortable with our boundaries so that we can acknowledge their experience that they're having while we're implementing the boundaries, we kind of reinforce the boundary with a bunch of either explanation, persuasion, or at worst, like a real harsh learning lesson. And what the research shows is, as long as our boundaries are consistent and we do the thing anyway, like, you know, it looks like you want to ride your bike without your helmet, that makes sense. You know, you hate the helmet, it feels horrible. As long as we're holding the helmet at the time or the bike so that they can't get on and say, it's up to you, it's helmet and bike or no helmet, no bike. But what we've done is acknowledge their experience. So I've been using this tool and hundreds of people I've worked with right the way through into the 20s, right the way from 2, because we don't really need another other than to tweak it for repetition, because kids get bored of the sound of it makes perfect sense. But it can just be as much as, oh, it sucks to put the bins out. It's a horrible job, rather than, well, you're supposed to contribute to the family. We just make sure that it's still putting them out. That's not under debate here, but yeah, it's a horrible job. And over time, what happens is kids start to feel that feeling of, my feelings are valid. It doesn't mean I don't have to do hard things, difficult things, things I don't want to do, or I can't do things I want to do, like have the rest of the packet of biscuit. I can't do it, but mum or dad gets that I might have an emotion about that, and they're not particularly bothered by the emotion. So for me, it's changed my life, that tool. And I think what is important, though, is it has to be in your style. So mums often do it with this is a huge binary statement, and there are loads of exceptions. Mums often do it with a lot of words. Dads often do it with very few words, and they might say things, you're a bit mad, mate. Of course you are, that makes sense. And it's much more lighthearted. It's got a different vibe to it. It doesn't necessarily have the tell me all about your emotions. There are some dads that love doing that, others that don't. But they're still doing the same thing, which is acknowledging that the kid is having an experience. That experience makes sense and is not going to change your decision, but you're there in that experience with them. And the beautiful thing is we see children quote unquote calm down, which isn't a phrase I would ever use with a child, but we watch it happen over and over and over and over, that kids start to find boundaries manageable when the empathy piece is there first. It's just a validation tool.
I noticed that I do that a fair bit myself. Like we'll fall into that when it's been a couple of rounds before a shower, and it's like, okay, bud, hey, if we're not getting into the shower, we're not gonna have time for books. We're not gonna have time for stories. So there's still and I also find that it's kind of probably the last resort as things are getting tiresome for me, and also understanding that the clock's ticking, it's getting like bedtime is genuinely coming along, and I can also imagine experiences or situations where there is a full tantrum or there is a kind of a full meltdown. What do you suggest to dads or to parents even that where that situation is happening and when things are ramping up and they're not getting that cooperation and they're not, what am I trying to say here? They're not getting the response from the child that they're
Yes. They're not
seeking.
getting the calming down. Yeah. Exactly. So I'll answer that, but just to go back to what you said, when you said if you don't hop out of the shower, there's not going to be no time for books. That is actually healthy, mindful parenting, to put it in a kind of phrase, because of the tone. So you've gone factual. So factual is different to consequence or punishment. So factual says, let's say bedtime is 7 or 9 or whatever age your kid is, to be able to say, hey, if you don't get out of the shower now, we aren't going to have time for books, is a really factual statement. It's when we go, if you don't get out of the shower now, I'm not going to read to you, or there's just going to be no time. It's the same thing, but you can feel it in your nervous system. If I said to you, I'm just not going to stay on this podcast if you ask, whereas if I said, oh, I'm going to have to, we're going to have to wrap up because I need to be somewhere, you'd be like, sweet, it's a fact. So it's all about tone. And so I want to make sure that people aren't thinking we can't connect things and say, hey, if you don't come out the door and get in the car to go to school, I'm going to pick you up and put you in the car. And I'm going to put the car seatbelt on you because we're going now. So it's not all airy-fairy. It's just that it doesn't have to sound like punishment in order for it still to be. So that would be the first thing I'd say, just going back to your lovely tone that you had there. But in terms of when it's ramping up, bizarrely, we use the same technique, but we just get more energetic with it. There's a wonderful guy called Dr. Harvey Karp that does piece on toddler taming, and he even does it with pre-verbal kids. So basically, kids lying on the ground, kind of like banging the toy on the ground, wanting to go outside, or something similar. That was very physical. It's not particularly cognitive because they're quite little, but there are words and sounds happening. And what we tend to do as parents is going, it's okay, hon, you can't go outside, it's raining, it's all right, I'll get you another toy or this and that. But the child's nervous system is actually wanting another nervous system to give it that same energy. And that doesn't mean we lie on the floor and throw ourselves around. But what he would say, and I have again seen this work with so many parents, is as a parent to be going, you are so angry. You might want to not use words like pissed off when they're little, but you can with teenagers, depending on your agreement in a family as to what words are okay. But with a little one, to say you're so angry because you so want to go outside, you're really frustrated in this room and you just don't like any of the toys that we've got left. We watch children just start to regulate, because it's not that they've really thought through what's going wrong for them. Their just bodies are reacting very viscerally to something that feels uncomfortable. And when another nervous system comes alongside and mimics that nervous system, like I'm not going to fix and solve your emotion, but I'm going to companion you through it. What we find is short term, quite often a child will calm down quite quickly, but long term, what happens is we have toddlers turning into children, turning into teenagers who have self-regulation because we've co-regulated. And lots of people think co-regulation is trying to fix them. It's okay. We'll go outside in half an hour when the rain has stopped. And yeah, maybe the odd 3-year-old will go, oh, great. Half an hour, that's fine, Mum, or that's fine, Dad, thanks. But mostly they don't. They just get worse unless we really do a bribe. And bribes are great. Distraction is great. But if it's all we've got and it doesn't work, we then run out of steam. And so to really be with a child in those moments of tantrum. Yes, if they're banging their head on a surface, you put your hand or you put a pillow there. I don't mean that we don't bring safety first, but if you can get your voice and your body, the great thing is try it out. You'll feel a bit stupid. Try it out in your own home, not in the park, and just see what happens. because often actually we get kids giggling because daddy looks so stupid beside them with a teddy bear going, oh, you don't want to play with this bear because you're bored of this bear. You want to be out in the sunshine. Often their eyes get big and they kind of look and they're like, weird, dad looks more stupid than I do. And we don't know all that's happening in their brain. But what we do know is as a parent, your physiology is staying in what I call green brain, which is in serotonin, oxytocin, the greener, safer hormones, and they're feeding off your nervous system. So at least 1 out of 2 is staying in the good zone, and quite often you get 2 out of 2. And a lot of the work I do is to try and help parents go, let's not have 2 brains full of cortisol, especially when one is a lot bigger, because it's not a fair playing field. You've got the car keys, you've got the alcohol cabinet, you've got the food, you've got the remote. They don't stand a chance if you go head to head with a child. But when you bring that big energy to join in with a child, they just feel really held. And they often, in the end, don't react against the boundary, the rule, the thing itself. They just want the journey through life of their emotional existence to be mirrored by somebody else and validated.
It sounds like there's a bit of yin and yang perspective going on here to some degree as well. So I'm reminded of a couple of situations. There was an incident where at the supermarket, and he started having a bit of a meltdown, and it was just we were about to pick up the bags, and he wanted to just kind of carry something, and I said, oh look, we can't do that, but you can do this one. And he didn't want to do it. And he had a bit of a breakdown, but I picked him up and I just held him. And that same thought process that you've got there in terms of the not trying to fix it, not trying to go there, not trying to, I can definitely understand from that there are people out there that get frustrated by hearing a baby crying, whether that's on airplanes or at the supermarket, all that sort of stuff too. But for me, it was just more of, I'm going to hold my son until he's calm. And I'm not going to fight. I'm not going to tell him he's wrong or tell him he's, he can't do that or shh and all that sort of stuff. It's more, I will hold him and he'll cry on me. And I'll just be like, I know, bud, I'm here for you. You let me know when you're ready. And pretty much as soon as I say, you let me know when you're ready, within 5 minutes, he's calm, he's back down, and then he's ready to accept, okay, well, this is what we'll do. And he instantly is very cooperative. And, and I don't mean that he's doing as I say, but just more of he's open because that emotion's passed. We've allowed that to kind of to come through. I find humming helps as well, but there's also just, there's another point that we had the other day where, he'll come in and he wants to watch an episode of one of the TV shows I let him watch is called Blaze. And it's about a flying car, and he's got the car, but funnily enough, he got the car before I even knew that it was a TV show. I just thought it was a toy car. But he came in and he wants to watch this. Then he's, I want to watch this. And then I would just go, I know you do. And then that instant, what you just mentioned before, just the instant smile on his face of, oh, dad can be like this too. And then it instantly gets him out of that face. And then, and then we're like, okay, cool. And then I'm like, oh, I know, but what else could we do? And what else, and then start doing some funny voices and a few things like that. And then there's occasional points where you can see he wants to cry, but he's too busy laughing. And I remember feeling like that as a kid at points as well. And I'm really upset, but also there was also an element of comedy here as well. It's funny and I get it. So yeah, there's that piece of the mirroring energy and coming in with them with feeling that sensation. But obviously sort of what I've suggested there in terms of that process that I've done. I mean, there's a lot of people out there that do try to rush it through and want to, I guess, speed up the process. They get frustrated themselves. What, in your practice, how do you guide parents through that themselves, and how do you reflect that back to them in terms of, what's coming up for you as a parent?
Yeah, I mean, this is actually the bigger piece of the work. So the mirror link pause with kids, once you get your head around it, is actually quite straightforward. It just takes a while to move out of the have you tried and why don't you, and you could do this and well, because I said so, or whatever it is, that just to start with, I can see that and it makes sense, will actually get a child far quicker to do what you want them to do. The tricky part is that because our children I've had so many parents say, oh, they just know my button. They just know how to push my buttons. And I've thought about this phrase so often because I think what actually happens is they're so close to us, especially, I guess, from a mum's point of view, like physically right from the beginning, those 9 months before they're even born, like there's this visceral connection. And, once they're born, same for dads, this visceral physical connection is that when they aren't doing what we need them to do in a way that, just use the word trigger, it's a strong word, but it just means it activates a little bit of cortisol and adrenaline in the system. There's a bit of stress, there's a bit of tension. We don't feel that spacious openness anymore. Is that it's a powerful moment of decision making that we don't feel like we have because it doesn't hit our cognitive brain first, it hits our body first and then our emotions. Is that we can often be into the telling off, into the rage or into the frustration before we even know that it's happened. And so using something like the mirror tool, like the moment's passed, it's not like people are going, oh, I could use it, but I won't. It's that the moment has already happened. And so the bulk of the work I do is working with parents to start to become really self-aware, but with self-compassion, not with telling. There's no point moving from telling off a kid to telling off ourselves. It's a lose-lose for everyone. But the movement to the U-turn, we call it, which means to what is happening inside me. What are not the one-offs, life's too short, but what are the regular moments? Is it bedtime every day? Is it when, I don't know, want them to do their homework? Is it trying to get them all out of the door in the morning to school? That was a huge one for me with trying to move 5 at the same time. Is it when they're not listening to me? Is it when they're on the sports field and looking like they've got 2 left feet? Like, where am I vulnerable? Where am I aware that I tend to get activated inside and I start to get that tone in my voice, or where I actually do lose it? We all lose it. I still lose it. So we use a different tool for that one, which is the same tool, but with 3 slightly different letters. So the first one is MLP, where you mirror the other person. You link, which means they make sense to you in some vague way. And then you pause, which gives them that breathing space, if safety isn't an issue, to start to figure out that this boundary is happening, but it's being done in an empathetic, validating way. We do the other way around. This one's called ALL. It's all in the book, which if anybody wants more of this, that's where to find it, which is acknowledge, link, let go. And the acknowledge does the same thing. So it's basically saying high feeling of to yourself. So whether it's just high feeling of rush of heat through my body, or it could be a specific emotion, high feeling of disappointment, high feeling of frustration, high feeling of loss, high feeling of fear. When we have children, we have more probably big emotions than with anyone else, maybe in the early days of a partnership, but those tend to settle. With children, we have this almost invisible umbilical cord for dads as well that goes through their lives. Like, they can make us feel so proud when they're behaving well or achieving. They can make us feel awful when they're being rude or not representing us well, or when they're not listening and we just need them in bed because we're so tired. Like, there's nothing like being a parent in terms of how vulnerable we are, especially to the areas we weren't well parented in ourselves. So this goes quite deep, but recognizing that the areas we're vulnerable in will also make sense. So comparing with other parents is a completely pointless exercise unless we lived in their home, were their same gender, birth order, had the same parents, had the same health journey. Like, we can't even remotely go to the nuance of what it's like to be the parent that we are with the children that we have. And so this is where self-compassion comes in. And so for me, I guess an example of that would be, I found it really incendiary, whatever the word is. Like, I was ropeable when the kids weren't listening, which with 5 was a lot of the time before I went for parenting. Like, 5 children all listening was not a common experience. So I lived in this really kind of unsafe for the kids environment where I was just losing it so often. And when I started doing this work, I realized that I had 2 parents, one of whom was pretty absent, my father. My dad, who therefore wasn't really listening. He was a reliable, bringing in the bacon, but he wasn't there. And my mum, who was very there and very strongly opinionated and therefore not listening either. So I didn't know that I'd been spat out of my childhood home with a not listening, not worth listening to feeling in me. Whereas my partner, he had different challenges, but he had been well listened to by one of his two parents. So his goal was just to try and figure out what they needed to listen to him. He had other things that triggered him. For me, I couldn't even figure out why I was so angry until I started to do some work with myself and working with I'm listenable to and my value is intrinsic. And that's when I started to be able to use MLP well. So they weren't listening. And instead of going, that awful, it's very female, that awful shriek that women do when we get activated, where it's almost stratospheric, the sound, nobody's listening to that. I wouldn't listen to myself in that state. But my voice started to get deeper and I started to say, hey guys, it makes perfect sense. None of you want to get ready for school. And we're leaving in 10. So let me know if you need any help. Whether you've got breakfast in you, whether you're dressed, you can go in your pajamas, but we are leaving. And it started to change our whole mornings, just me working with my sense of acknowledging my feelings. I feel rejected. I feel undervalued. That makes perfect sense, not given my children, but given my background. And as I started in the moment and in therapy, processing those feelings, I started to be able to, in the moment, because it takes a bit of practice, but in the moment, regulate myself. They're not listening. It's not personal. Doesn't mean I'm not valuable. Just means I got a job to do. I could then move into the space of going, hey, none of you are down here yet. We're leaving in 10. It's not looking good. Let me know if you need any shoelaces. Your lunches are here. But that tone that they could actually absorb. And so there's been multiple examples in my life where when I turn to myself and explore first. And the thing I want to add to that is the whole conscious parenting, mindful parenting movement, I think has got a little bit hijacked by a kind of sense of peace and calm. And I can feel an emotion of frustration with that. It's actually about time saving, effective parenting that means we have more fun. Like, I'm all about the fun. I'm not about the, let's be good, kind, sweet people, although that's lovely. I have just found that we get through all the difficulties so much faster, even though there's a bit of investment up front. Our relationships are much more solid. Our connections don't break easily now. And I'm not blowing my own trumpet. It could have gone the other way very easily. But with these kinds of approaches, I've got to 17 to 24 they are now. All 5 of them happen to be home at the moment between travels. And the friendship they have with each other, they've all gone through times of seriously disliking each other. But over the years, being with my 5 kids and the connection I have with them is all been based around this idea that I turn to my own journey first, do a little bit of work with self-regulation, get connected and curious to them, validate them, and have some pretty strong boundaries and rules in the house. And there's a simplicity to it that means we have over the years kind of become that effective, efficient, fun side, as opposed to trying to stay in some kind of zen. Like, you wouldn't look at our family and go, oh, there's a mindful family. You go, there's an ordinary family, but they have great relationships with each other amongst the mess.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. It's sort of like there's this expectation that's being set that perfection or a good family, good in quotation marks, means everybody's calm and we can communicate and we can all speak to our feelings and there's no fluctuations. But the reality is that we're all human. We all have emotions. We all have hormones. We all have frustrations and things that come on, and we all have our own journey of things to come through. So, being aware of what these triggers are within us to work through to then, so that we're not, would you say it's not passing it down another generation?
Yeah, I mean, I think each generation has an invitation to not necessarily break, but to take a big step forward for the next generation. And I want it to be me rather than my kids having to do that. My parents didn't have access to the information we have now. They were doing their best, but they didn't they didn't know about connection. They didn't know about emotions and validation. They weren't in a good relationship with each other. And I see it as a bit like a relay race. Like, I hope I'm going to pass a very imperfect but slightly more appealing baton on to my kids, and then they can do the same with the next. So I think breaking or turning around things is just too big a statement and can make us feel like we've got a massive job to do. But I think it's good enough to be just developing ourselves and moving forwards and growing so that our kids have a better experience of being parented than the one before, and that then continues as a kind of a cascade effect down the generations. There's a legacy there.
Well, that's exactly the point of where the Better Dads Club titles come from, because, similar to you, I grew up with a father who was physically present but emotionally, mentally absent, alcoholic, and he literally left my half brothers, 5 and 3, and my dad walked out and left them. And then with me, it was different. I mean, he loved my mum, but there was a whole lot of stress and just things that he just never worked through. So it's my dad set the bar pretty damn low. So being better, I mean, me just sort of showing up every day or every day that I can, and obviously I say that in terms of the co-parenting situation. So and being as present as possible. And I think the beautiful thing is that I've noticed this, and I've said this to a couple of the dads at my son's kindergarten the other day. We had a fundraiser. So for them, the kindergarten had a midwinter dip fundraiser, and a lot of the dads are in there, involved in the community, setting up with not just setting up with the barbecues, but setting up with the marquees, helping with the pack up, the pack down. And this is stuff my dad just never did. Everything in the community was always my mum. There were other dads in the neighborhood and other dads so I grew up with, there was about 6 or 7 kind of close-knit families that all of us kids were about the same age, and we played on the streets and did all of that. And a number of those dads were very present, and they would get together and we'd be there, and they'd be the ones kind of coaching our cricket teams and that sort of thing as we were growing up as well. So they were more of the male role models for me than my dad was. And I think there's a whole, as I've said before on this podcast, I can count on one hand the amount of times that my dad showed up or either took me to my sports games or any of my extracurricular activities, versus nowadays I've been taking my son to swimming every Sunday since, I think, before his first birthday. Pretty much as soon as we could get him into the pool and there was an age for a swimming lesson. So that's been our thing. And he is so confident in the water. And we took him, like, after the ocean dip the other day, he came in with me. He came into the ocean as well. He wanted to do that. And, it's June, it's winter time here in Wellington. So, but he wanted it, and he trusted me. He was with me, and and even when I was like, right, bud, like, your jaw's shaking, it's time for us to get out, he was like, no, I want to stay. But he's just having a good time. And I think that there's a lot of dads that are going through this in this generation right now. And with that, I think it's genuinely great and beautiful that we've got more men that are actively choosing to be present, where even some of my clients, we talk about, they have made that decision to stop drinking, stop smoking, because their dad died young, or that was just kind of the culture. Like, they'd come home and then that was just it on the weekends, and it was just surrounded by alcohol and not actually there wasn't a life experience. It was just, this is life. You work and then you get drunk with your friends and then you swear and then there's, some negativity, and then all of a sudden there's a fight or an argument or something later on. So, but so many of us dads are choosing fitness. We're choosing, books. We're choosing adventures. We're choosing, active things. But I do wonder, there is an element for me where, could the pendulum swing too far the other way? Like, we're kind of overdoing it.
Overdoing time with the kids, do you mean? Or
well, I guess, there's many dads that generally want a closer relationship with their kids. And I think because if we haven't had those good male role models at home who are the grounded, present, healthy, then we're trying to formulate a new template on something that hasn't existed for us. So with that, like, what are some of the common things that you see fathers that are doing well, and what are the things, or some of the things, if any, that are potentially unintentionally getting in the way of connection, or that could potentially be sort of going too far the other way? So, for example, a friend of mine put it that, dads are not male mums. We have our own way of interacting. We're far more physical. You mentioned earlier in terms of the language as well. Like, we're a lot more short. We kind of cut to the quick with the way we choose our wording and these kind of things for explanations. So, it's that piece of presence is great. We still need to be boundaries. We still need physicality. Is there a bit where it could go to where maybe we're either being too soft, or we're not necessarily setting boundaries, or where are some dangers, or some, I guess, sort of some lines that we should be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good question. My kind of, off the top of my head, kind of response to that is there's something about the way that gender and let's look at a heterosexual couple for a moment here, where there's, I think, movement in both directions is really useful. I think the idea of being a male mum absolutely is not a great idea. However, the idea of the way a male would parent in their own way to be as effective as being the dominant parent, and moving to that ability for men and women to be able to move much more fluidly in this space without becoming versions of each other. So as men are getting more, like you're saying, which is great, more connected in the child space and connected with each other, there's so many more opportunities for work to become a more fluid space between mums and dads, where mums who want to be the main breadwinner, it's not so difficult for the dads as time goes on because there's more of a community. Now, mums create community more easily than dads do generally, but I'm hoping that that's starting to change, because I don't think that the fact that men would never be a male mum means that they can't be the dominant parent in their own style. So kids don't need, beyond those, very first early years, early kind of months of breastfeeding and things like that, they don't need a female version of parenting more than a male version of parenting. And obviously there's lots of complexity around part-time work and career orientation and glass ceilings to be discussed. And there's no doubt that kids do absolutely fine, more than fine, with a dad being the parent who's at home more and the mum being the parent who is less at home. So I don't think it can go too far. I think the difficulty is if culture doesn't kind of support men to feel comfortable doing that, make guys feel either isolated in it or like somehow they failed in their careers. I think the idea that it's just as profoundly fulfilling for a man to be longer at home with kids. And, the Scandinavian countries are well ahead of us on this in terms of recognizing that when I say there's no difference, there may be a very different style, but there's no difference in terms of benefit for the child to be brought up a little bit more equally, or even the other way around. And so that would mean a bit of a stretch for the guys in terms of some softness will definitely need to be there, but it doesn't necessarily mean a whole bunch more words or a whole bunch more deep empathy. There's, the mindfulness research shows that children's best chance of thriving in their adult lives is having one well-connected green brain, which means self-regulated adult. And it doesn't even have to be a biological parent. But if it is, it could be a male and it could be a female. It could be it could be non-binary, it could be a youth worker, it could be it's about the attachment relationship being one that feels trustworthy, that feels consistent, that feels validating, that feels like it's got healthy boundaries. But I think one of our problems is it's come in such a female kind of model in our minds that we've lost touch with the idea that men don't have to become more female in order to do this well. It would just look a bit different. The meals might look different. The boundaries might look different. The activities might look different. The bedtime might be later or earlier, or they might not be wearing the right clothes for the weather. Who cares? It's like this feeling of I would love it to be, and I think we as women have colluded in this just as much. We've kind of commandeered the parenting space so that we want it done like we want it done, but we also want help to have it done the way we want it done. I see quite a lot of that with clients where women are desperate for support, but also quite reluctant for that support to be given in a way they wouldn't do it, like they would do it better. And so, really moving the space into if we prioritize the well being of the kids, actually, all they need is one adult who is in a healthy relationship with themselves and by default with the child in order to thrive in life. And obviously, if there's two, even better. And it doesn't matter if they're two men, two women, one of each. Those things have very little bearing on a child's well-being. But a tense home, a home with conflict, a home with absent or neglectful or over-parenting, doesn't matter what the gender of those parents is, a child generally doesn't flourish particularly well.
Right on. Okay. I've got I guess like a little bit of a bonus question here at the end. For if there was one thing that the dads out there listening today could take away from this conversation and put it into practice this week, what would you want that to be?
Great question. What would I want it to be? I would say, and this might be an unpopular answer, I would say emotions are really important and they're not our enemy. And my experience with men is when they start to recognize their emotions matter, and not other people's emotions matter and they need to kind of be empathetic. But when their emotions matter, their joys, their fears, their sadnesses, their losses, their angers, then there's a growth that happens really fast. But there's usually a slight pain point of resistance, of wanting to either compartmentalize and put them to one side and just move into doing. But from what I've seen, the men that will tolerate that experience of going, I am actually feeling nervous. I'm feeling vulnerable. I'm feeling a bit lost. I don't quite know where I'm going. And to recognize that strength, that's health, that's a place from which your children will feel known and loved because they will feel all of those things. So to be brave enough to explore the emotion space as a man, I think is a powerful thing for men, but also a powerful gift to the world and of children growing up who will experience that openness to their own emotions. Women tend to do it more easily, not necessarily with more skill, but are connected to their emotions much quicker, and men less so. I think it's a win-win for men rather than a kind of reluctant, okay, if I have to. There's a huge growth in richness that happens in men's lives when they'll include their validity of their own emotions in their experience of life.
That's great. I know that, yeah, a lot of men, we tend to want to fix things or move through that process rather than sort of sitting in and staying with it. Do you, obviously, you mentioned earlier around the ALL practice, but do you have another practice or another tool that people could use to, if they haven't even touched on the emotions, or similar to me, that they haven't been, they've come from a family or a father that was also absent of emotion and disconnected from all of that? Just, is there a quick, easy, simple tool or some baseline place to start with for it?
Yeah, I think that tool is probably the simplest, but it can be simplified even further down. Where if you put, and some people feel silly doing this, so you can do it very subtly. But if you put a hand on your chest or your stomach or both, you immediately can feel the visceral activation in your body. And you also get a touch of oxytocin in your body, which is the relational hormone. So when you hold your child's hand, you and they get oxytocin. You give your partner a hug or whatever. So when we do that to the body, we immediately have a sense of, one, I matter. I'm not focusing on someone else. Two, I'm having a movement of feeling in my body. And three, I'm taking care of myself. So it's a really simple action. Now, I always add the words, high feeling of rage, high feeling of real worry. It makes perfect sense given this situation, like as quick as that. But you can just do it with the action. It's enough to pause and slow down whatever problem is occurring, where either you might distract yourself and go and do something else and avoid, or you might pile in with still an activation too high in your body. So that is a very quick shortcut to the beginnings of going, how am I doing in the middle of this situation?
Okay, so that's sort of a personal MLP, the mirror link pause, that we're then using our hands to kind of anchor in.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. All right. Hey, Shirley, thank you very much for your time. We're going to wrap it up there, but I gained a lot out of this conversation, and I'm sure the listeners here as well. So thank you very much for coming along. Just an opportunity here for a bit of a plug. You've got as part of on the Renew Your Mind website, you've got one of your parenting courses coming up for the zero to 10s coming in July.
It's July the 29th, so that's 6 Wednesday nights online for anyone, mums, dads, anyone. And that's also on demand. So if you sign up, you can just get the recordings or you can turn up live. And then October the 21st is my preteen/teen course. So that's sort of 10 upwards, because some 10-year-olds sit in the younger category and some are hitting pre-puberty at that point. So that's, again, 6 weeks, Wednesday nights online from October the 1st. And they're all on the Renew Your Mind website.
Fantastic. And your book, The Mindful Parent, is it available through your website, or where can people pick that up from?
The website, and it's also through, online sources at Amazon. But probably the quickest and cheapest is through our website.
Fantastic. Okay. Awesome. Well, we'll put that down in the show notes. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Tom.
Hey, you're welcome. Thank you.